So stand with Daniel Hale. Who is Daniel Hale? In May 2019, drone whistleblower Daniel Everett Hale was arrested and indicted on allegations that he disclosed classified documents about the U.S. military's assassination program, believed to have been the source material for a series in The Intercept called The Drone Papers. On March 31st, 2021, Hale pleaded guilty to a single count under the Espionage Act. See, usually the Espionage Act is used against people like Daniel Hale. It's used against whistleblowers who are revealing U.S. war crimes. Against Assange, that's the first time it's ever been used against a publisher. Carrying a maximum sentence of 10 years. On July 27, 2021, Daniel was sentenced to 45 months in prison, all for revealing U.S. war crimes. Hale was a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. During his military service from 2009 to 2013, he participated in the U.S. drone program, working with both the National Security Agency, the NSA, and the Joint Special Operations Task Force at the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan, the Jets ended. After leaving the Air Force, Hale became an outspoken opponent of the U.S. targeted killings program, U.S. foreign policy more generally, and a supporter of whistleblowers. He publicly spoke out at conferences, forums, and public panels. He was featured prominently in the award-winning documentary National Bird, a film about whistleblowers in the U.S. drone program who suffered from moral injury and PTSD. And we'll see here, Daniel Hale is one of these people. Hale based his criticisms on his own participation in the drone program, which included helping to select targets based on faulty criteria and attacks on unarmed, innocent civilians. So let's see here. Whistleblower jailed for showing 90% of people killed by U.S. drones are bystanders. This was Daniel Hale who revealed this, and is going to prison for 45 months for this. Daniel Hale, a former member of the U.S. Air Force, leaked classified information about drone warfare to a reporter after leaving the military. He revealed that 90% of those killed by U.S. drones in Afghanistan are innocent bystanders, not the intended target. According to NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden, he should have been given a medal. Instead, he's being given prison time. Quote from Edward Snowden, Daniel Hale, one of the great American whistleblowers, was just moments ago sentenced to 4 years in prison. His crime telling this truth. 90% of those killed by U.S. drones are bystanders, not the intended target. He should be given a medal. So let's see here. I want to find some details. With the Trump administration started the attack on Hale, the Biden administration has continued the assault. Again, bipartisan, both parties. The U.S. has zero tolerance for whistleblowers and those who leak classified information that, according to the prosecutors, greatly threatens national security will pay the price. According to Scahill, who he leaked to, the initial threat of decades in prison against Hale was a cudgel deployed by prosecutors in an effort to break Hale's spirit and to frighten other prospective whistleblowers. That President Joe Biden's Justice Department continued this prosecution instead of dropping the Trump administration's case serves as an ominous reminder that the war on whistleblowers is a permanent fixture of the U.S. system. The use of the Espionage Act by successive administrations to prosecute whistleblowers is an affront to basic liberties and the constitutional rights of the accused, as it prevents people of conscience from presenting a real defense before a judge or jury. Its use to target dissent, independent journalism, and whistleblowing is an authoritarian weapon, masquerading as a law, and it should be abolished. And so, talking about this hypocrisy of U.S. sanctions from earlier in this episode today, we put sanctions on countries we deem authoritarian. We put sanctions on countries who we accuse of committing war crimes. And yet our sanctions are human rights abuses in and of themselves. The U.S. attacks whistleblowers. The U.S. attacks journalists. The U.S. is engaged in authoritarian behavior ourselves, and we should have no right to sanction countries trying to force them through violence to our will. It makes no sense. And so, in a little bit more contemporary relevancy to this drone program we're talking about here. So we know the war in Afghanistan recently ended, and people were praising the Biden administration for getting out. Kyle Kalinske had said yeah, I could have been dead better, but everybody complaining about that. I knew it was going to be bad anyway. We should give him credit. This was a good thing. Well, Biden did say he's going to continue the war on terror in Afghanistan. And what does the war on terror in Afghanistan do? It does things like this. U.S. general admits drone strike near Afghan airport that killed 10 was a mistake. At least 7 children were killed in the strike. U.S. Central Command General Frank McKenzie admitted in a briefing Friday that the August 29th drone strike near Kabul airport was a mistake. 10 people were killed in the strike, which the U.S. believed was targeting a terrorist, but instead killed an aid worker and others in the area. Quote, I am now convinced that as many as 10 civilians, including up to 7 children, were tragically killed in the strike. Moreover, we now assess that it is unlikely that the vehicle and those who died are associated with ISIS Khorasan or were a direct threat to U.S. forces. I offer my profound condolences to the family and friends of those who were killed. And so basically, this was here where the U.S. government, again, the U.S. government did a war on terror drone strike, claiming that they were killing terrorists. And they killed 10 innocent civilians, no terrorists. And that's why, in my opinion, the U.S. war on terror is a Trojan horse for endless war. The U.S. war on terror, for every civilian you kill, you radicalize their entire family and community. You create more terrorists when you do this war on terror. You don't end terrorism through a bomb. And so we even have North Korea, everybody's favorite authoritarian government. North Korea here had a great take on the U.S. war on terror. Let's read it. Undeserved victims of indiscriminate counter-terrorism. The U.S. forces adorned the denouement of, quote, the most protracted war in the U.S. history, the war that deprived numerous people of their lives for the past 20 years since its invasion of Afghanistan with the civilian massacre. We can show a little civilian massacre. On August 29th, the U.S. forces stationed in Afghanistan, just before their complete withdrawal from this country, launched a drone strike on the vehicles en route to Kabul International Airport and announced that the strike annihilated 2 terrorists. However, the experts in the media that made an on-site inspection announced that the victims of the last drone strike were not terrorists, but 10 guiltless civilians, which include an Afghan technician working in a soybean processing factory operated by an American civil society organization, as well as his young children. On September 14th, the spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when asked by a journalist on this matter, clarified that the U.S. should not seek to give an evasive reply to the extensive query and ununanimous denunciation from the international society, but make a thorough investigation into the truth of the incident at all costs to present the Afghan people and international society with a responsible answer. The past incidents of killing innocent people in Afghanistan by indiscriminate bombing of the U.S. under the pretext of annihilation of terrorists are simply too many to enumerate, with the last incident nothing more than the tip of the iceberg. WikiLeaks has revealed extensive U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan. But the DPRK foreign ministry continues here. In the year 2002, the U.S. Air Force bombarded a wedding hall in the local province of Afghanistan, resulting in the heavy toll of hundreds of people. In 2008, the U.S. Air Force mounted an air raid on a village in Herat, Afghanistan, killing more than 100 people, including 50 children and 19 women. According to the recent foreign media report, the U.S. mounted in total more than 90,000 air raids on Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and many other countries for the past 2 decades, and the number of civilians killed in the course amounts up to 48,000 civilians killed. Despite these facts, the U.S. has never once made an honest reflection on its behavior. This time, too, the U.S. had sought to cover up the truth of the incident until it reluctantly admitted its fault, when faced with the stern eyes of the international society and clear evidence. The U.S. is well advised to explicitly reveal its barbarities committed in Afghanistan and all around the world under the cloak of, quote, counter-terrorism. The U.S. is doomed to face the trial of history if it tries to avoid it. And as we see from what the U.S. government does to whistleblowers, what they do to journalists like Julian Assange who publish their war crimes, they're not owning up to what they've done. They are continuing to hide it. We have extensive classified information in the US that hides war crimes. One of the key things that the US forces in Afghanistan did before they leave was smash up documents, smash up computers. They don't want their war crimes, their torture programs to be revealed to the world. And so I wanted to end today by reading Daniel Hale's letter to the court ahead of his sentencing of 45 months in prison for revealing drone strike program killing civilians. It's a really powerful letter by Daniel Hale. It really stuck with me. And I just wanted to read it and kind of do some commentary on it so we can hear it. I mean, Daniel Hale is a hero. He is not a criminal. He is not somebody who deserved to go to prison for exposing these crimes. July 18th, 2021. Quote, "We now kill people without ever seeing them. Now you push a button thousands of miles away. Since it's all done by a remote control, there's no remorse. And then we come home in triumph." This was said by a US Navy Admiral, Jean LaRogue, speaking to a reporter in 1995. Things have not changed. Dear Judge O'Grady, it is not a secret that I struggle to live with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Both stem from my childhood experience growing up in a rural mountain community and were compounded by exposure to combat during military service. Depression is a constant. Through stress, particularly stress caused by war, can manifest itself at different times and in different ways. The telltale signs of a person afflicted by PTSD and depression can often be outwardly observed and are practically universally recognizable. Hard lines about the face and jaw, eyes over bright and wide, now deepest or deep set and fearful, and an inexplicitly sudden loss of interest in things that used to spark joy. These are the noticeable changes in my demeanor marked by those who knew me before and after military service. To say that the period of my life spent serving in the US Air Force had an impression on me would be an understatement. It is more accurate to say that it has irreversibly transformed my identity as an American. Having forever altered the thread of my life story, weaved into the fabric of our nation's history, to better appreciate the significance of how this came to pass, I would like to explain my experience, deployed to Afghanistan as it was in 2012, and how it is I came to violate the Espionage Acts as a result. In my capacity as a signals intelligence analyst stationed at Bagram Airport, I was made to track down the geographic location of handset cell phone devices believed to be in the possession of so-called enemy combatants. To accomplish this mission required access to a complex chain of globe-spanning satellites capable of maintaining an unbroken connection with remotely piloted aircraft, commonly referred to as drones. Once a steady connection is made and a targeted cell phone device is acquired, an imagery analyst in the US, in coordination with a drone pilot and camera operator, would take over using information I provided to surveil everything that occurred within the drone's field of vision. This was done most often to document the day-to-day lives of suspected militants. Sometimes, under the right conditions, an attempt at capture would be made. Other times, the decision to strike and kill them where they stood would be weighed. The first time that I witnessed a drone strike came within days of my arrival to Afghanistan. Early that morning, before dawn, a group of men had gathered together in the mountain ranges of Patika province around a campfire carrying weapons and brewing tea. That they carried weapons with them would not have been considered out of the ordinary in the place I grew up, much less within the virtually lawless tribal territories outside the control of the Afghan authorities. Except that among them was a suspected member of the Taliban, given away by the targeted cell phone device in his pocket. As for the remaining individuals to be armed of military age and sitting in the presence of an alleged enemy combatant that was enough evidence to place them under suspicion as well. Despite having peacefully assembled, posing no threat, the fate of the now tea-drinking men had all but been fulfilled. I could only look on as I sat by and watched through a computer monitor when a sudden terrifying flurry of Hellfire missiles came crashing down splattering purple-colored crystal guts on the side of the morning mountain. Since that time and to this day, I continue to recall several such scenes of graphic violence carried out from the cold comfort of the computer chair. Not a day goes by that I don't question the justification for my actions. By the rules of engagement, it may have been permissible for me to have helped to kill those men whose language I did not speak, customs I did not understand, and crimes I could not identify in the gruesome manner that I did, watch them die. But how could it be considered honorable of me to continuously have laid in wait for the next opportunity to kill unsuspecting persons who, more often than not, are posing no danger to me or any other person at the time? Never mind to honorable. How could it be that any thinking person continued to believe that it was necessary for the protection of the United States of America to be in Afghanistan killing people, not one of whom present was responsible for the September 11th attacks on our nation, notwithstanding in 2012, a full year after the demise of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, I was a part of killing misguided young men who were but mere children on the day of 9/11. Nevertheless, in spite of my better instincts, I continued to follow orders and obey my command for fear of repercussions. Sound familiar? Follow orders. I just followed orders. It's not my fault. Sounds kind of like Nazi Germany. Yet, all the while becoming increasingly aware that the war had very little to do with preventing terror from coming into the United States and a lot more to do with protecting the profits of many weapons manufacturers and so-called defense contractors. The evidence of this fact was laid bare all around me. In the longest, most technologically advanced war in American history, contract mercenaries outnumbered uniform-wearing soldiers 2-1 and earned as much as 10 times their salary. Meanwhile, it did not matter whether it was, as I had seen, an Afghan farmer blown in half, yet miraculously conscious and pointlessly trying to scoop his insides off the ground, or whether it was an American flag-draped coffin lowered into Arlington National Cemetery to the sound of a 21-gun salute. Bang, bang, bang. Both served to justify the easy flow of capital at the cost of blood, theirs and ours. When I think about this, I am grief-stricken and ashamed of myself for the things that I've done to support it. The most harrowing day of my life came months into my deployment to Afghanistan when a routine surveillance mission turned into disaster. For weeks, we had been tracking the movements of a ring of car bomb manufacturers living outside of Jalalabad. Car bombs directed at us at U.S. bases had become an increasingly frequent and deadly problem that summer. So much effort was put into stopping them. It was a windy and cloudy afternoon when one of the suspects had been discovered, headed fast-bound, driving at a high rate of speed, eastbound. This alarmed my superiors, who believed he might be attempting to escape across the border into Pakistan. A drone strike was our only chance, and already it began lining up to take the shot. But the less advanced Predator drone found it difficult to see through clouds and compete against strong headwinds. The single payload MQ-1 failed to connect with its target, instead missing by a few meters. The vehicle, damaged but still drivable, continued on ahead after narrowly avoiding destruction. Eventually, once the concern of another incoming missile subsided, the driver stopped, got out of the car, and checked himself as though he could not believe he was still alive. Out of the passenger side came a woman wearing an unmistakable burqa. It's astounding as it was to have just learned that there had been a woman, possibly his wife, there with the man we intended to kill moments ago. I did not have the chance to see what happened next before the drone diverted its camera when she began frantically to pull something out from the back of the car. A couple of days passed before I finally learned from a briefing by my commanding officer what took place. There indeed had been the suspect's wife with him in the car, and in the back were their 2 young daughters, ages 5 and 3 years old. A cadre of Afghan soldiers were sent to investigate where the SA-2 or where the car had stopped the following day. It was there they found, then placed in the dumpster nearby. The eldest was found dead due to unspecified wounds caused by shrapnel that pierced her body. Her younger sister was alive, but severely dehydrated. As my commanding officer relayed this information to us, she seemed to express disgust, not for the fact that we had errantly fired on a man and his family, having killed his daughter, but for the suspected bomb maker having ordered his wife to dump the bodies of their daughter in the trash so that the two of them would more quickly escape across the border. Now, whenever I encounter an individual who thinks that drone warfare is justified and reliably keeps America safe, I remember that time and ask myself, how could I possibly continue to believe that I am a good person, deserving of my life and the right to pursue happiness? 1 year later, at a farewell gathering for those of us who would soon be leaving military service, I sat alone, transfixed by the television, while others reminisced together. On television was breaking news of the president giving his first public remarks about the policy surrounding the use of drone technology in warfare. His remarks were made to reassure the public of reports scrutinizing the deaths of civilians in drone strikes and the targeting of American citizens. The president said that a high standard of near certainty needed to be met in order to ensure that no civilians were present. But from what I knew of the instances where civilians plausibly could have been present, those killed were nearly always designated enemies killed in action unless proven otherwise. Nonetheless, I continued to heed his word as the president went on to explain how a drone could be used to eliminate someone who posed an imminent threat to the United States. Using the analogy of taking out a sniper with his sights set on an unassuming crowd of people, the president likened the use of drones to prevent a would-be terrorist from carrying out his evil plot. But as I understood it to be, the unassuming crowd had been those who lived in fear and terror of drones in their skies, and the sniper in this scenario had been me. I came to believe that the policy of drone assassination was being used to mislead the public, that it keeps us safe. And when I finally left the military, still processing what I had been a part of, I began to speak out, believing my participation in the drone program to have been deeply wrong. I dedicated myself to anti-war activism and was asked to partake in a peace conference in Washington, D.C., late November 2013. So again, this was under a Democrat, Barack Obama. People had come together from around the world to share experiences about what it is like living in the age of drones. Fazil bin Ali Jabbar had journeyed from Yemen to tell us what happened to his brother Salem bin Ali Jabbar and their cousin Walid. Walid had been a policeman, and Salem was a well-respected firebrand imam, known for giving sermons to young men about the path towards destruction should they choose to take up violent jihad. One day in August 2012, local members of Al-Qaeda traveling through Fazil's village in a car spotted Salim in the shade, pulled up towards him and beckoned him to come over and speak to them. Not one to miss an opportunity to evangelize to the youth, Salem proceeded cautiously with Walid by his side. Fazil and other villagers began looking on from afar. Farther still was an ever-present Reaper drone looking too. As Fazil recounted what happened next, I felt myself transported back in time to where I had been on that day, 2012. Unbeknownst to Fazil and those of his village at the time was that they had not been the only ones watching. Salem approached the jihadist in the car. From Afghanistan, I and everyone on duty paused their work to witness the carnage that was about to unfold. At the press of a button from thousands of miles away, 2 Hellfire missiles screeched out of the sky, followed by 2 more. Showing no signs of remorse, I and those around me clapped and cheered triumphantly, as we saw from a WikiLeaks released video by Assange and Chelsea Manning. Not this specific instance, but similar. In front of a speechless auditorium, Fazil wept. About a week after the peace conference, I received a lucrative job offer if I were to come back to work as a government contractor. I felt uneasy about the idea. Up to that point, my only planned post-military separation had been to enroll in college to complete my degree. But the money I could make was far more than I had ever made before. In fact, it was more than any of my college-educated friends were making. So after giving it careful consideration, I delayed going to school for a semester and took the job. For a long time, I was uncomfortable with myself over the thought of taking advantage of my military background to land a cushy desk job. During that time, I was still processing what I had been through, and I was starting to wonder if I was contributing again to the problem of money in war by accepting to return as a defense contractor. Worse was my growing apprehension that everyone around me was also taking part in a collective delusion and denial that was used to justify our exorbitant salaries for comparatively easy labor. Again, people who work those types of jobs don't work as hard as a laborer. The thing I feared most at the time was the temptation not to question it. Then it came to be that one day after work, I stuck around to socialize with a pair of coworkers whose talented work I had come to greatly admire. They made me feel welcome, and I was happy to have earned their approval. But then, to my dismay, our brand new friendship took an unexpectedly dark turn. They elected that we should take a moment and view together some archived footage of past drone strikes. Such bonding ceremonies around a computer to watch so-called war porn had not been new to me. I partook in them all the time while deployed in Afghanistan. But on that day, years after the fact, my new friends gaped and sneered, just as my old ones had. The sight of faceless men in the final moments of their lives, I sat by watching too, said nothing, and felt my heart breaking into pieces. Your Honor, the truest truism that I've come to understand about the nature of war is that war is trauma. I believe that any person either called upon or coerced to participate in war against their fellow man is promised to be exposed to some form of trauma. In that way, no soldier blessed to have returned home from war does so uninjured. The crux of PTSD is that it is a moral conundrum that inflicts invisible wounds on the psyche of a person made to burden the weight of experience after surviving a traumatic event. How PTSD manifests depends on the circumstances of the event. So how is the drone operator to process this? The victorious rifleman, unquestioningly remorseful, at least keeps his honor intact by having faced off against his enemy on the battlefield. The determined fighter pilot has the luxury of not having to witness the gruesome aftermath. But what possibly could I have done to cope with the undeniable cruelties that I perpetuated? My conscience, once held at bay, came roaring back to life. At first, I tried to ignore it, wishing instead that someone better placed than I should come along to take this cup from me. But this too was folly. Left to decide whether to act, I could only do that which I ought to do before, God and my own conscience. The answer came to me, that to stop the cycle of violence, I ought to sacrifice my own life and not that of another person. So I contacted an investigative reporter with whom I had an established prior relationship and told him that I had something the American people needed to know. Respectfully, Daniel Hale. That's a heavy story. And so I think the moral of all of this here is that US involvement in wars, whether it be militarily, boots on the ground, whether it be drone strikes, or whether it be US sanctions that harm civilian populations, kill people all the time around the world. It's immoral. It's wrong. And the American people shouldn't stand for it anymore. It's bipartisan. It's both political parties who support drone strikes. It's both political parties who support harmful US sanctions. We have to end the duopoly. We have to end the capitalist duopoly and move on to socialism, anti-war activism. We can't keep making excuses for this type of thing. Till next time.